They call me the hippopotamus, flows that glow like phosphorus, popping off the top of this esophagus, rocking this metropolis. I'm not a large water-dwelling mammal. Where did you get that preposterous hypothesis? Did Steve tell you that perchance? Steve.
My rhymes and records, they don't get played because my records and
Welcome back everyone, I'm Follygon, and in this video we're going to do something a little bit different. I have a sphere here in front of me, which is how most of my sculpts start out. I very rarely start with a base mesh. I like to kind of start with a sphere and then turn it into something else from there. So this is my kind of base mesh of choice. And in this video, we're going to turn that sphere into a baby hippo. And I'm going to kind of walk you through my process, my thought process, what's going through my head as I work on it. We're going to watch the time lapse together. And I do have the entire body here. This is Fiona, the baby hippo from the Cincinnati Zoo. It was born prematurely, I think earlier this year, maybe towards the end of last year. Not too sure, but she's super adorable, so I had to sculpt her. Had a lot of fun doing that. So we are going to go ahead and go over the process of turning a sphere into this hippo. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. The first thing you're going to notice right off the bat here is that I pretty much only use 2 or 3 brushes max. I'm using the clay tubes brush to kind of get that square texture that you see kind of popping up on the mesh. I use that as a basic adding and subtracting clay kind of brush, where then the move brush is the thing that I use to kind of push and pull and move stuff around in large or small chunks. You'll see me add some ears on here very quickly with just some spheres and then adjust the shape a little bit. And then you're going to see me actually remove them from the mesh here in a sec as well. The reason I do that is I like to kind of split my meshes up into separate subtools. You're going to see me do that a lot as we move forward, and I'll try to explain why I choose to do that with each one. For the ears, it's so that I can kind of change their placement, size, shape, and worry about those as a separate piece, whereas the head I can kind of focus on by itself. So of course on another monitor I have my references pulled up. Reference is super important, especially for something that you're trying to make close to anatomically correct. Even for stylized stuff, definitely use reference. If it's your own creation, maybe sketch it out beforehand. But I got a ton of reference up. I have some anatomy references up for some hippos, as well as a bunch of images from the Cincinnati Zoo's Instagram account of baby Fiona. And I'm using those to kind of block out the shape of the head here. That is the most important thing for me in this portion. I would say it's almost the most important thing for the entire sculpt, because I'm sure you've heard the saying that no amount of fine details and all of that is going to save your very bad primary forms. So using that clay tubes brush, I'm trying to block out where all these bony landmarks are, and then as I notice some little things that need to be tweaked here and there, I use my move brush and I'll adjust like the lips or something like that. So you're looking at this and you're like, well, what happened to the lower jaw? So that's more of the splitting up that I was talking about. Much like the ears, I took the lower jaw and split that off as a separate part, and I just added it back on. So I like to kind of split those up, and then I have more fine control over what's going on there. I'm actually going to split the lower jaw off later as well, but I just wanted to be able to reattach it so that I could start sculpting in where some of these folds are going to be for fat, as well as more of those bony landmarks for the jaw and some of that stuff. So really not worrying about how dirty my mesh is. That's not kind of my concern. What is my concern is just making sure that everything kind of has the right shape, which it sounds kind of obvious when you just say it like that, right? But it would surprise you how many people rush forward too quickly. So definitely stay in this stage of the sculpt as long as you can. And you'll see me start to add in some different skin folds, moving on to kind of the secondary forms. Don't forget though, as you move on to start creating your secondary forms, if you're working on a hippo or whatever it is, that at any point you can, go back and make a major change, especially if you're using subdivision levels. It makes it really easy to step down to a low level, make a big change, and have that carry up through all of your subdivisions. So over on that top left corner of the sculpt, I threw in a little fat ring for where I think the ear is going to be placed. I might adjust that a little bit later. Started adding in some fat underneath the eye for the eyelid and all that, as well as just starting to add in where I think some folds are going to be. It can be difficult if you're looking at your references and you're seeing some shadows and you're kind of confused. Is this how the shape is flowing, or is this like a trick of the light? That's why it's important to gather a lot of references while you're working on something like this, so that you can kind of make sure that, okay, maybe that was just like a weird lighting setup that they had when they took that photo on a crappy iPhone or whatever you have. So just, like I said, make sure you grab a bunch of references so that you can kind of figure out better what's going on with the surface. So at this point, I mask off that lower jaw. I'm going to make a separate poly group for that, even split that off again like I was saying earlier. You saw me make a little bit of a change to that upper lip with the pinch brush as I kind of get to this stage where I'm trying to work on these fat folds and skin and all this stuff. The pinch brush can be super helpful here. If you're using the pinch brush and you hold Alt with it, turn on lazy mouse, you can get an inward pinch instead of pinching up on your surface. It's a little bit of a different, strange interaction, but once you kind of start playing with it, you'll get the hang of it, and it's pretty neat. Moving on, you're going to see me start adding some texture onto here. Now, for the texture that I'm placing, it's pretty simple. It's a standard brush. You go into your stroke, you set that to spray, and then you grab whatever alpha you want to use. There's a bunch of skin alphas and different textures in ZBrush by default. That's what I use if I'm just basing something out really quick like I did here. But eventually you might want to try something else or just hand sculpt it, because those alphas that are in there by default can look pretty generic depending on how you use them. But if you're using them with a spray stroke, you can get some interesting interactions like I did here. For that lower lip, I was masking some stuff off and using some inflate as well as my move brush, and I'm doing that on the top of the head as well. I'm doing all of this to kind of get that fat fold interaction. There's some stuff that you can do by adding some gravity to your brush and the way it works. I don't really mess with any of that stuff. I have my brushes set up in a pretty particular way for my workflow, and I think it's pretty helpful and easy to get used to for other people. And I like to kind of keep my tool set kind of vast in what I know I can do, but what I actually use is pretty small, because I can do a lot with a little. And I think that's kind of a useful thing to keep in mind, because you don't really need a lot of different tools to be able to get a lot of different results. Adding in the eyes, we're going to add in the ears. This is why having these as separate pieces is really useful. We can just adjust them, mess with them separately. They have their own subdivision levels. They have their own undo history. So if we make a mistake on the ear and I want to undo back, but since then I've made a change to the face and I don't want to have to undo that, it just makes it really easy. It kind of works, in my mind, like layers in Photoshop. You have your own layer for each subtool. And there's some interesting stuff with ZBrush 4R8 where you can actually create some folders now. It's a little bit janky, but it's a little bit of a hack as well, but there's a cool video on my channel. I'll post it up in the top right-hand corner for you guys to check out if you're interested in that. So the ears are in place, the eyes are in place. Add in an extra neck roll for where it's going to connect to the body, and from there we can go ahead and start texturing and painting this head. So at this point, the head, the top of the head and the lower part are split off. The main reason I do that, I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but in this case it's so that I can get a really nice overlap between that top jowl, the lips, I don't know what you'd call them on a hippo. Anyway, get a really nice overlap between the top and lower portion. If you're working in Dynamesh or whatever you're working in, it can be really difficult if you start overlapping stuff and then you want to change the geometry later. I typically like to work high to low, as in I sculpt a high resolution hippo like I would here, and if I need to, but not for my purposes today, I would retopologize it from there. It gives you more freedom, especially if you're doing something more creative. You don't exactly know the direction you're going to go later. You can more focus on your creativity, changing shapes, making big form changes, Whereas if you had a set topology already, makes it really hard to kind of do those things. So again, that overlap is really easy to get with separate tools there, and we will merge those together eventually, but for now we have a nice little overlap going on. I am stepping up and down, making some different changes. Even at this point, I feel comfortable enough that I could, step all the way back down to my lowest subdivision level. It's probably somewhere around, I would guess, 50,000 polys on this, maybe a little bit lower, somewhere between 30 and 50. And grab a big move brush or whatever I have and make those changes there. I'm playing with some more texturing and a little bit of painting. It's a little difficult to see right now, but one interesting thing that I would mention that is very helpful is if you go down into your tool masking palette, there's a really cool option in there where you can mask by cavity, and from there you can add some paint into those cavities to kind of make them pop a little bit more. Looking at the ear, I use the inflate brush to add in some little warty textures in there. I notice it's a little bit too strong though, so I step back a few subdivision levels and use my trim dynamic brush to kind of knock those back a bit. Now I also added in a little bit of hair here with the fiber mesh to the jowl region, as we mentioned earlier. Just something a little simple. I added it to the ears as well as where these whiskers will be. This one's a little bit different, a little bit longer, just because from references it looked like that hair was a little bit longer. So that's the basic process. That's the basic rundown of what I was working on. And again, I do have the full body here. I might do a time-lapse video of this on my YouTube channel. I should have one up on my Instagram account by the time I post this. And if you guys have any more questions about my process, this character, or this hippo, I guess, or anything else that I'm doing, done, or working on, all the above, just throw them down in the comments and I'd be happy to answer them for you. If you guys are interested in some new materials, brushes, some fiber mesh stuff, any kind of bonus content that you might be interested in, head on over to my Patreon and check some of that stuff out. And with that, I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.